The history of Saul comes to a very sad end in the final chapter of 1 Samuel. What had started with such high hopes played itself out on a battlefield where not only Saul and his armor bearer, but three of his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab and Malchishua, were killed by the Philistines. But even in this defeat there is a glimmer of hope, and we'll read about it in 1 Samuel chapter 31 and verses 11 to 13. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-shan and came to Jabesh and burnt them there. And they took their bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. What we've just read is the final paragraph of 1 Samuel. If we hadn't got it, we would have been left with a very bleak scene. After beheading the body of Saul, the Philistines put his armour in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. That's verse 10 of this chapter. It's a dreadful picture of failure, because Saul was anointed with a particular task in view. It was that he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines, chapter 9, verse 16. And not only was it defeat on the battlefield, it was defeat right throughout the nation, because when the men of Israel saw what had happened, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. That's verse 7 of chapter 31. But instead of that very dark scene, we have something quite different. While so many of the people fled, there was another group of people who, when they heard what had happened, they went to the enemy rather than fleeing from the enemy. All the valiant men of a city called Jabesh Gilead arose and went all night. We read that in verse 12. I'm not sure why these valiant men hadn't been on the battlefield, but whatever the reason for their absence, these men were touched by the dishonour that had been done to Saul, and they would not allow it to go on. At the risk of their lives, they took a difficult and dangerous journey to ensure that Saul and his sons had a proper burial. We really need people like these valiant men among the Lord's people. One of the commandments in the law of Moses was that thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people, neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbour. And we read that in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 16. And that brings a challenge to us all. How do we react when a fellow Christian stumbles and falls? When, through failure, the world maligns their testimony and mocks the name of Christ? Do we simply ignore them? Do we callously think that it serves them right? Worse still, do we gossip about it to others with malicious words? Or do we have the courage, like these valiant men, to seek to help the situation and to remove the reproach? Are we like the Good Samaritan who had compassion and went to the injured man and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine? Luke chapter 10, verse 34. Are we just like the priest and the Levite who passed by on the other side? It takes courage to help the fallen, but let us not forget that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and hide a multitude of sins, as James tells us in chapter 5, verse 20 of his letter. May we have the courageous spirit that springs into action to help the crushed and fallen among God's people. What a lovely note to end 1 Samuel with.